Converting day scenes to night scenes. Draw a night scene in the same manner as a daytime scene of the same area using the same design dialogue discussed earlier. Keep in mind that the activities are taking place at night and keep the other members of the group aware that the picture is being drawn as a nighttime scene. When the drawing is almost complete and the major ideas have been illustrated, convert the drawing to the true nighttime view by using the color markers and broad-tipped black marker. To do this, be familiar with how artificial lighting affects the appearance of a scene. The street lights, the storefront displays, and car headlights will often be the principal sources of light, not the sun. This requires a new set of skills with the markers. Nighttime marker techniques. The most obvious difference between a day scene and a night scene is the dark sky. Even a simple rendering of the sky as a black tone will convey the impression of nighttime. There are many other differences, though, between how one sees things at night and how they appear during the day. Because the sources of light are different, objects in the scene will appear quite different at night. Below is a list of items that appear in a typical co-design drawing and suggestion on how to render them effectively and quickly in a night scene. Refer to color illustrations for examples of the use of these techniques. Group members who are coloring in a night scene may need help from the artist. Item: how to render it in a night scene. Sky: black or very dark blue. Buildings that form part of a distant city skyline should have a few windows colored in yellow. Foliage: yellowish green, lit primarily from the side or from underneath by adjacent streetlights. Storefronts: show the storefront display windows as well lit. They are often the most dominant features in a retail area. Illuminated shop signs and marquees can add a festive air to the street. Add color sparingly to window displays. Figures standing in front of windows are almost black silhouettes. Except for the display windows themselves, the shop's faces are a darker tone. Cars: the underside of cars and passengers inside tend to be dark, almost black. The dominant feature of the car is the headlights and taillights. The headlights tend to appear very large with a halo of yellow light around the point source of the lights itself. Even when it isn't raining, headlights and taillights will typically show streaks of reflected light on a pavement drawn straight down on the paper. Streetlights: as with the car headlights, these point sources of light gives off a surprisingly large halo of light around them, which can be drawn with a yellow marker. Building faces, street pavement, and foliage near the street lights will be quite clearly defined and colored. Lights over water. Water at night in a harbor or lake, for instance, will appear black except for horizontal bands of reflected light from illuminated signs or street lights on the far bank. A word on site sketching at night. If the subject of the workshop potentially involves nighttime activities, try to visit the site beforehand at night. Notice how different it appears. Depending on the workshop suggestions, the drawing may show many new nighttime uses for the area with new lighting as well, but some of the scenes will remain unchanged. distant skyline silhouettes, prominent buildings, and so on may well appear the same, so it is important to note how they appear at night. Workshop drawing of a night scene. Source: Civic Center, Calgary, Alberta. Nighttime sketching presents some unique problems. Quite often it is difficult to see your sketch pad when standing in an alleyway, and using color markers to note the lighting conditions is usually impossible. Don't try to make the sketch complete on the spot. Just make rough notes about the lighting conditions and prominent features. The notes are for use in later workshop drawing sessions. Workshop drawing of a night scene. Source: Quesnel, British Columbia. Part 3. Applications of the process. 10. Regional planning. A regional receptional facility involving over 1,000 people, Elk Beaver Lake Regional Park, Victoria, British Columbia, August 1985. A regional parks board extends the opportunity for involvement in environmental planning and decision-making to users of a heavily frequented park. Context: the Elk Beaver Lake co-design project was conducted in association with the Capital Region Parks Department and the University of Victoria, British Columbia. The intent was to obtain the views of park users, special interest groups, and park staff on improvements of the Hamsterley Beach area of Elk Beaver Lake Regional Park. The study was conducted in coordination with the Environmental Studies program at the University of Victoria. Besides the involvement of the general public, 25 environmental students also acted as user clients in the study of environmental issues and methods of decision-making with emphasis on public participation. Scope of study. Elk Beaver Lake is a heavily used regional recreational area within 15 minutes drive of downtown Victoria and near such popular tourist attractions as Butchart Gardens and the ferry connections to Vancouver, British Columbia, and Anacortes, Washington. The study involved the design of buildings and landscape for improvements to Elk Beaver Lake Park, including picnic shelters, concession stands, restrooms, activity areas, commercial areas, service buildings, and parking. The design was also to include special provisions for the handicapped who at the time were restricted to a fenced area of the park. The design also was to include provisions for special user groups such as boaters for power, sail, and canoe activity who needed to be accommodated as well. Design sequence. The method of design followed a common sequence. 1. Functional programming. 2. Consideration of special features. 3. Design of the parts considering the relationship of internal volumes to external massing, facade studies, functional relationships, and adjacencies. In lighting and acoustics. 4. Preparation for alternative concept designs. 5. Analysis and selection of the preferred concept design with reference to initial design criteria. 6. Development of the selected design in sketch form for presentation to clients. Seminars among the students examined the broad aspects of the design such as sight, empathy, movement views, golden mean proportions, light, sound, and texture, as well as detailed aspects such as particular transitions between soffit and fascia, or the joint connection between a column and a beam. Such discussions were integrated into the design sequence. Co-design workshops. The entire program relied on user-client input as a constant source of information and feedback. The Elk Beaver Lake project widened the scope of input by involving the general public and park staff. Instead of one public workshop, 2 were scheduled in stage 1 in order to accommodate the environmental students in one workshop and the general public in the other. During the first workshop, environmental students acting as user clients worked with co-design architectural students acting as designers. Following the workshop, the user clients wrote description of their ideas for environmental preservation or changes to the park, which were given to the acting architects as a guide in the design of parts. The second workshop, held for the general public, was facilitated by the environmental and architectural students. After listing the activities and engaging in site walks again, the environmental students facilitated discussion of several hundred ideas from park users and recorded their descriptions as the architectural students sketched at the direction of the participants. Assessing workshop responses. In the following week, the environmental students summarized the information received during the 2 workshop events. For this second stage, the students referred to Christopher Alexander's book, A Pattern Language, to assist them in considering the site's special features and in more fully describing their own ideas. For example, the environmental students were asked to give the architectural students a full depiction of their preference for surroundings for any one of the events described at the workshop. Meanwhile, the architectural students began the stage of functional programming. This included 1. Site assessments and preliminary diagrams on functional relationships, bubble diagrams, relationship matrices, and other systems. 2. Preliminary design of the parts, alternative relationship diagrams with conceptual plans for each alternative. 3. Preliminary designs for each of the parts, such as the environment for handicapped users or the environment for picnickers. Various discussions were scheduled during the first week to complement the sequence of work being done in the architectural and environmental areas. For example, discussion on strategy planning took place in the study of decision-making and public involvement process that the Victoria Parks Board practiced. Board officials lectured on its structure and procedure for administering the regional park, as well as on financing and budgeting. Design of parts. The second week was basically a conceptual concentration on the third stage, the design of parts. First, the architectural students presented preliminary designs for the parts to the user clients and park staff, such as the design of a pub restaurant space for both parking and preparation for windsurfing, and public docks with rental space. These drawings included perspectives, plans, section and light studies, and studies of architectural detail. During this intermediate presentation, the user clients made a rational selection of the preferred alternative after having first voiced their remaining concerns and suggested additional ideas to ensure that the architectural students were in line with user-client expectations. Participants react negatively to their own ideas. The user clients reacted quite negatively to their own ideas at this stage. They saw their ideas as being too grandiose, destroying the natural qualities of the site. The students saw that the ideas for overdevelopment came from themselves, not some anonymous force in an architect or developer. They then reversed their original thoughts and agreed that the park setting must dominate and that the commercial aspects must be subordinated. They threw aside many of the ideas that the architectural students had drawn for them and started again with newly defined expectations. Does this mean the participation process did not work? No. Under conventional practice, sophisticated, time-consuming, and expensive proposals might have been drawn, accompanied by models and fine-tuned presentations, only to be rejected. The workshops proved to be a great success because the user clients were given an opportunity to discover for themselves the importance of preserving park beauty. They scaled down the scope of the development, clients and designers alike sharing a newfound understanding and sensitivity to the issues. The result then concentrated on enhancing the existing natural qualities as well as designing an improved eating facility and an interpretive center. At this point, the architectural students presented the various discrete parts to the user clients for final approval. The user clients directed the acting architects to continue into the sketch design stage and synthesized the design of parts into a cohesive conceptual design. Final designs. During the third and final week, the acting architects dedicated their time to developing the selected scheme into sketch form in preparation for a public display for user-client comments. The final outcome was very positive. Users had been able to develop a particular portion of the project through the drawing talent of the designers, compare it with the outcome of others working on different aspects of the development, and then see how it might fit into a comprehensive plan for the area. In the end, not all of the ideas could be used, nor were they all appropriate. However, users had the opportunity to contribute and judge for themselves the appropriateness of the ideas. The user clients, including the park staff and the regional parks board, expressed excitement at the park's potential and felt that the public participation exercise had achieved the most workable solutions to development problems and was a good vehicle for appropriate decision making. The results are incorporated in a master plan of the regional district. examples illustrating the design of parts.